Hi again, everybody. This video is sponsored by a wonderful contribution from Grace, and here's her story. And this is her doing an audio recording for me to try to save my voice a little bit, which I always appreciate. And it's regarding abuse within a Catholic school. And it's something me and her had spoken about a little earlier in the week. So here we go. Uh-oh. I gotta redo it. Hold on. Try this again. All right, here we go now.
Hi, Ollie. I'm doing this audio recording and sending it into your channel, and I was kind of inspired after we spoke earlier today. It's hard for me to wrap my thoughts all around this, so I've done just a little bit of research. There's so much out there, and this is very much a topic that's been in the news about Catholic schools and abuse of nuns and priests. So it's not a new topic, but it still is something that may really be triggering for people to hear about or to talk about. So I'm not going to speak of these things and by any means with the intention of triggering anybody or offending anybody, but I would very much like to bring this topic, open it up for discussion, and I think that you're probably the best person to handle this. As you mentioned to me earlier, um, your parents had talked about being abused at the hands of the Catholic Church too. And the difference being, as was so aptly stated during our conversation, is this stuff is generational. It gets learned somewhere and passed on, but we know that it was wrong. I was abused, and corporal punishment was used in my childhood as well as in school and elementary school during those formative years. But I was very, very much against spanking my own children, just absolutely against it. I understand too that socially speaking in society, there are different waves of popular ways to raise children or ways of educating children. Child psychology, I mean, we could go from Freudian, Jungian, um, um, I'm trying to think of the name. Then you get into more humanistic approaches and relational approaches where things are more dealt with. How are we relating together, that we're connected, like Bowman family system stuff for anybody who's interested in looking at those kinds of things, different trends. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is different trends. So we keep progressing, we keep evolving, we keep trying to not repeat mistakes of the past. So it's a real big topic, it's a real touchy topic. Um, Things get repeated if they're not thought about and brought out into the light of day. There have been a lot of movies made about these kinds of abuses. I know personally in my life, it has really stunted my growth in many areas. And as a matter of fact, I lost a teaching job. I was teaching in a Catholic high school. Not that that was my first choice, but it was the only work I could get at the time. And five of us at the end of that year, I was only there 1 year at that school, five of us were laid off because of monies that the archdiocese had to pay and shuffle up the line to pay off lawsuits by pedophile priests. That
Yeah, my ex-wife worked for before I got her into the public school. She was a Catholic school teacher as well. Same deal, same thing about money and constantly having to shuffle money to pay off sex abuse stuff. But this all started with me and her on a conversation because she reminded me of something because she brought up the topic of Catholic school. And it was something I heard a lot about from Drunky and Meet Normus. because they both went to Catholic school when they were kids, and all they would talk about is how the nuns would beat the shit out of them, the priests would beat the shit out of them, and then they tell you didn't tell your parents because then the parents would beat the shit out of them. So a lot of these baby boomers, when they went to school, when they went to Catholic school, were dealing with, pretty severe corporal punishment, which, would support their narcissistic tactics, their narcissistic traits, because they learn a lot. Many of them learned a lot of it from Catholic schools and from nuns, you know, the physical torture, the physical abuse, the humiliation tactics. That's all stuff that happened within the Catholic school. And God is watching you, and everything you do, you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. So, like, it is a pretty big key, a piece of the puzzle to the baby boomer generation. I think is many of them who had gone through Catholic school and had endured that abuse through Catholic schools, through nuns and priests and the like. And then when they used to talk about, when they used to make them go to church and then go to mass, the masses were in Latin back then. It's a very in tongue type of language. So you don't understand it. The priest is up there, everybody's chanting in Latin. Think about it. I mean, that'll mess with your head. That'll mess with your head big time.
Were brought about by pedophile priests. So, it continued to touch my life in a way that was kind of unbelievable. I'm very educated. I have a couple of college degrees, and to lose a job because I was low on the totem pole for seniority and at will employee, and boom, there I am again with at that time my youngest child was 4 years old, and to lose my job and have nowhere to turn. So anyway, um, I'm going to go ahead and start with just a couple of my own thoughts and take it from there. So the only way I could try to organize my thoughts around this, and as we discussed earlier too, it's very hard to organize your thoughts around traumatic events, especially when they go over years and years and years. I am going to be 60 years old on my next birthday. I'm part of that baby boomer generation, although I've never identified as part of it. I would be considered to be at the very tail end of it. I identified more with the hippies and the peace, the love, the rock and roll. So I didn't see myself as like an up and coming yuppie, trying to keep up with the Joneses and all of that kind of stuff with the baby boomers generation. In fact, I rarely in my life have had friends that have been my own age. They've either been much younger than me or much older than me. I've just never fit in with my age group. So I've always had a little bit different perspective in my life. Okay. All right, I guess I'll start here. What my Vatican I Catholic schooling taught me, and I always say Vatican I because that's when corporal punishment or carnal punishment was promoted in the school systems. All right. Vatican II made a break from that. I was in Catholic high school, and there was a break from that. And this was a time in the 70s when the nuns were wearing, pantsuits. They didn't all wear the habit. I can remember the one nun had this like big wooden chunky necklace with and it was a rosary necklace. So they were like the cool nuns. They were coming out from the corners. But I would venture to say, and a lot of the elderly sisters that were there, they were still in wearing the habit, in uniform. And some of those attitudes, I mean, just because something changes legislatively, so to speak, doesn't mean that attitudes change. We can't legislate morality. We can't force people to change the way they think about things or how they see things. And some of this behavior that's been manifested through the institution of the Catholic Church against children is so deeply rooted, and to understand the beginnings of it, you would have to do a lifetime study of it. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who will have stories to share as maybe we break into this new area of looking at, we've looked at family of origin. We've looked at spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, abusive siblings, all of this, all the way around the board. So now this is more of an institutional kind of abuse, yeah, condoned by society, condoned by the church, supposedly condoned by God. Because in the eyes of a child, every nun and every priest was like God, just like our parents were to us.
And that would make sense of where they get this godlike complex from, of where everything is basically dictated that they do from a higher power. I mean, I think this is a major rock unturning of a source of, because that generation seems to have a godlike complex more than any other. And this is where, and this is where they're getting it from. They are emulating what they experienced from their abuse of that godlike complex, that the nuns are God, the priests are God, God is going to judge, 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 judge. This is where, you know, many of them got put on their train of thought. And whether or not I think you went to Catholic school or not, so many did. When this goes out prevalent in society, other people are going to pick up on it, whether or not they actually went to Catholic school.
As small children, we're so impressionable, so bitterly impressionable. So, what my Vatican I Catholic schooling taught me, that I am a sinner, born in original sin, and I am unredeemable of my own will. That I could burn in hell if I am not obedient to the priests and nuns. You know, and for a small child to get a very vividly painted picture of hell in their mind is absolutely frightening. I can remember as a child being afraid that I was going to go to hell and burn in hell with devils and pitchforks. As an adult, of course, we look at that and we go, really? But we're talking about the very impressionable mind of a child. And of course, mom and dad go along with this story. So who do you believe? You don't even know enough to question it. You know, and this indoctrination starts, you know, right from the cradle, you know, right on through. We believe what we are told when we are children. Okay, what I think and feel does not matter. Feelings, we become so disassociated from our feelings, so removed from our instincts, so removed from our inner voice to say if something feels right or wrong. And then what we feel, I mean, we are overtly told we're wrong, not only with the many little more tacit ways, dirty little looks or pushing you off to the side or ignoring you, but we're told straight up, you're wrong about that, by the nuns, by the priests, and to say nothing of what you go home to. Okay? So what you think and what you feel does not matter. And when that is your foundation, you go out into the world open to anything. You have no boundaries. You have no way of separating yourself from other people because anybody can cross the line. That's how you were trained, to allow anybody to cross your personal boundary.
Yeah, and she's right. I mean, this is like, this was all in front of us. So, you know, you couple the physical torture, the physical violence, the mental manipulation of it, and then you add in some kind of mythical place where you're going to be burned and be physically tortured by demons for all eternity. Is it any reason why so many of them are screwed up the way they are? It's pretty obvious, a big contributing factor to their narcissism.
Your emotional boundaries, your psychological boundaries, your physical boundaries. Okay, I also learned that my body is not within my realm of control. My body can be beaten, slapped, and scorned At any moment, a nun has a whim to do so. I can be forced to be humiliated, be beaten, be paddled, be made to kneel for hours in a corner in front of my peers and classmates. My bodily needs must adhere to the whims and schedule of the nuns. If I wet my pants, there will be hell to pay. No one will help me with dry clothes because wearing a urinated wool uniform all day will add to the punishment I deserve. A urinated wool uniform is especially uncomfortable during recess in extremely hot or cold weather.
And this stuff is routine. Like, that's how I know, like, my parents weren't lying. Like, because you always think, like, because you hear these stories repeatedly from back in the time, in the era. And you couple in, again, the sexual abuse that was occurring rampantly. I mean, no wonder. No wonder. I mean, not only should they have to be paying for the sexual abuse, they should be paying for the physical torture that they inflicted on children. You should be able to go back and sue them for a policy of putting their fucking hands on a child. But you know what? Your parents went along with it because I guess they didn't know any better. Their parents went along with it. Oh yeah, it must have done something wrong. Must have done something wrong in the eyes of God. So it could be why they reject. A big reason why they revolted so harshly against their parents' generation in the '60s. If you were being sent into a school that was allowed to physically and a lot of times sexually abuse you, and that was perfectly okay, and you couldn't tell your parents, not because you were embarrassed, because then you would come home and they would beat you even harder. It's no wonder. Still doesn't excuse them, because they obviously knew it was wrong. Instead of saying, I'm never going to do this to my children, no, they say, I'm going to use what I've learned now and use the same tactics. That's why I still don't give them any type of pass, because they all know it was wrong.
Yes. I was one of those bedwetters. Won't even go into those reasons. We all know why. I wet my pants at school. We would have to line up and wait in line so long that I just couldn't take it, and I would wet my pants. I wet my pants in mass, and we were in mass every morning, Monday through Friday, and if it was a holy day of obligation, we went back to mass in the evening and on Sunday. Mass was in Latin, a language that none of us spoke. Only the nuns and the priests were privy to the cryptic code, which made it even more unreal, which made it even more one step removed. It was like some kind of evil ceremony, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody, but this was every day for several years, all through grammar school, every day going to Mass. If you didn't walk in a straight line, if you turned your head to the left or right, a nun would swoop down on you and crack you on the head with a pointer, pull your hair, or drag you into the vestibule in the back of the church and slap you around. We had to go to confession every week, which is another practice that can really play with somebody's self-esteem, play with the value that you hold within yourself, and be humiliating to have to confess to a stranger, essentially, how wrong you are. When the confessions really of children would be just normal human encounters, events, and feelings. you know? Everything was mysterious and shrouded in a cloud of mystery. It was a little eerie and frightening, and all of the imagery in the church of suffering, in bleeding Jesuses on big crosses, and it's my fault and your fault as a young Catholic person that Jesus was nailed to the cross because of my sinful nature. So burning in hell, as far as I was concerned, was right around the corner. So I started doing a little bit of research and I was overwhelmed. I mean, of course, I wasn't surprised, but I was overwhelmed at the amount of information that's out there. I've seen several of the movies, and especially some of the things about the Catholic Church in Ireland are absolutely unbelievable. And I have not seen that new movie yet, Spotlight, but I do want to see that. So, what does this do to you as a person when you are demeaned, belittled, tortured, and fearful every day to walk to school, to go to school, to get on that bus and be there and know that you have to be there all day? What does that do to the psychology of a child? I can't even verbally put words to it. So I found a blog, and this man absolutely puts words to what I feel about it too. So I took a few excerpts and I'm gonna read some of his stuff, and I will go ahead and send you the link and you can post it if anybody is interested. And like I say again, I'm really sorry. I really am sorry if this offends anybody, but I know my experience, the Catholic Church was, in addition to my own family of origin, destroyed any sense of self that I had, destroyed any sense of being that was in me. And so when I went out into the world as a teenager and a young adult, a young woman, and now an older woman, going out into the world with such a tattered sense of self, I was perfect prey for every kind of predator that crawled the face of this earth. There was no way I could say no to anybody because I had no boundaries. I had no emotional or physical boundaries. I can't even begin to talk about it. Like we said, Ollie, it's hard to put the words to it. Every time I try to approach some of these things in my mind to speak about it or write about it, my mind goes crazy with wanting to get away from it.
Because once your body isn't your own, you have nothing. If this doesn't belong to you, then nothing does. If your skin, if your body, if your physical well-being isn't your own, nothing will be. And you will always have that type of anxiety. And, it doesn't matter, where it happens, or, in this case, we're talking about Catholic school. But even though, like, corporal punishment wasn't allowed when I went to school, okay, there was still enough abuse going on there, bullying, bad teachers, where school was just another source of anxiety for a lot of us. Once you're broken, you're broken. So it would make sense that when you're dealing with that level of abuse that they went through back then, where it all came from.
But little by little, we do this one step at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and read from this blog. And again, I apologize if I'm offending anyone. So it may be a trigger warning. If you don't want to hear anything about this, you can, click off the channel. It's time to acknowledge that there is something sick to the core of the Catholic Church in its relationship to children. Something in the essence of either the Church's philosophy or its execution is terribly flawed. But what distinguishes the Catholic school system from others is that a relatively high proportion of pathological abusers were tolerated within their systems. These problems are only being dealt with symptomatically by incident and limited to financial compensation and an occasional apology. Because of this, the church and its clergy can no longer be entrusted to have anything to do with the physical or moral development of children. Without an honest and transparent examination of the root causes and a fundamental change in the structure of the church, any claims that all of that was in the past are meaningless. Child abuse is defined as the physical or emotional or sexual mistreatment of children. Priests only represent a fraction of the Catholic clergy that deal directly with children. Brothers of various orders have also been catching a lot of flack lately. Yet, when it comes to sheer numbers, the sisters or nuns of various orders of Catholicism have had the greatest exposure to, therefore, impact on children. I'm continuing with the author's words. I claim the culture I describe as widespread because invariably, once realizing that our companions attended Catholic schools as well, the topic of conversation would turn to abuse at the hands of the nuns. Only the names of the nuns and their orders would be different. The patterns, proportions, and ways of violent expression remained consistent.
It's not all that remains consistent, because it's not only the priests and the nuns, okay? And I've seen documentaries of what actually happens between priests and nuns, and it's pretty sick. It's pretty sick. But it's not only them. It's the church members as well. It takes willing participants to go along with a conspiracy like that in order to be able to pull it off. Okay, that means your church members who the first sign of abuse, the first accusation, the first rumblings, they are doing what flying monkeys do. And that is encircling the narcissist, encircling the abuser, and then turning the victim into the abuser themselves. Okay, it's deeper than just, the wizard behind the curtain and the wicked witch flying around, the priests and the nuns. It also takes that army of flying monkeys who are there to encircle and defend at the first sign of trouble.
Sidebar, they all pull it from the same playbook, right?
And here's the problem with the major religions: Catholicism, Islam, and Judaism. All of them were implemented by force and manipulation. All of them. Okay, before Catholicism, the Jews were running rampant. Okay. Catholicism comes about. Islam comes about. The Muslim Crusades, which was which anybody who studies Islam knows it's a political ideology. It's a war. It's a war manifesto. And so is Catholicism, the Old Testament stuff as well. Okay, and then you had the Muslim Crusades, and you had the Christian Crusades in response to the Muslim Crusades. Doesn't matter, both are implementing by violence, force, and manipulation. Now, with Catholicism, you had the New Testament, which was a reformation of the old way of doing things. Still too much mental manipulation, narcissism, okay, and force. That's a very hard thing to just give up on. because it's still happening today with the mental manipulation of Catholicism, and they haven't given up on it, and they'll never be able to give up on it. Which is why I'm not into religion to begin with, because it's all telling you how to think under penalty of some mysterious force who's going to punish you. No matter how you cut it, that's always going to be manipulation, no matter what.
Like the narcissistic playbook, all the tactics are the same. In the order of the nuns that I was left in the care of were the Dominican sisters. I've run into people where I live now that went to the same elementary school with me, and our stories line up. We're still at 50s and moving towards 60 years old, lamenting our childhood beatings at the same friggin' elementary school. We were children in the 50s and 60s. And this is when it was this abuse was so widespread. There was a Catholic school in every archdiocese across this nation. Okay, back to the article. And the author says, my first memory of grammar school was of children screaming and crying in pain, literally being dragged by their ears from one line to another. If they resisted, they were slapped on the face with open hands and pulled or literally dragged across the concrete walk to the proper line. Sidebar, in that part, in that little excerpt, he's talking about how they would put us into groups for what class we were in and what group we were in, and everybody knew if you were in the dumb group, the smart group, the okay group, whatever group. And there were times where this author tried to hide within another group, and you would get physically beaten and dragged across the parking lot. We were all afraid all the time. Okay, and what does that do to a person? Back to the article. Keep in mind, half the kids involved were my height, less than 4 feet tall, new to life, and the nuns were full and fuller-sized adults, dressed in billowing black and white uniforms that communicated more like bats from hell than angels of mercy. An important aspect of abuse is that witnesses to abuse often experience psychological trauma comparable to that of the abused.
Yeah, it's terrorism. Why do you think ISIS kills people on video in front of people, public executions? So everybody learns this will happen to you if you step out of line. It's the same tactic. It's terrorism. Now, they weren't killing kids usually. I'm sure some of them got killed by these that took it too far. But it's the same purpose. It's the same reasoning. It's the same thought process. Same reason, terrorists do public beheadings, light people on fire, throw them off roofs in a town square for everybody to see. To send the message, this will happen to you. The tactics are exactly the same.
During class time, and as practiced by the clergy I was exposed to, was a very public spectacle whose audience was youth of both sexes at their most impressionable ages. Nobody in the class was immune, neither male nor female. But if I were to estimate the ratio of physical violence against boys versus that of the girls, I'd say 6-1. Abuse of the girls was mostly confined to swats on the hands with rulers and an occasional slap on the face. Little sidebar, for me, it was on the ass. I was bent over in front of the class. So you're wearing a jumper, a skirt with a little vest attached to it, and you bent over. So the whole back of your legs was exposed to the class, right? And a big paddle brought out with holes in it so it could move through the air faster. Brought out, the paddle was half your size as a child, and it wasn't one swat. 3, 4, 5, 6. And you had to hold your ankles, bend over and hold your ankles. Slapped in the face many times. One time I got slapped in the hands and my hair was pulled because I was using a pen I got it from my father's business, and it was a gold colored pen, and that was too showy. And that drew attention of the nun, and I got beaten for that. You had to hold out your hands and be hit with a pointer or a ruler. So I witnessed it being done to other girls, and it was done to me. And as Ali and I, when we were talking on the phone, just to let everybody know, I remember George Carlin back in the day did a part of his comedy routine, having gone to Catholic school with carnal punishment himself. And his mother went in to talk to the nun because the nun said that George's, they called him Carly, his penmanship was terrible. And the mother told the nun, well, it is because you've crippled him by beating his hands. So he couldn't even write. I could relate. Okay, back to the author. This is one of many patterns that it's important to acknowledge. The sociological impact of psychological emasculation of young boys at the hands of adult women and witnessed by their female peers in Catholic schools is almost ignored. It most certainly contributes heavily to subsequent incidents of self, spousal, and child abuse. Sidebar. There you have it. There you have it. To stop abuse, to stop it from permeating generationally or into the family or into the society, takes a lot of guts and courage and a big heart to say it stops with me. And you have to acquire a certain level of awareness and consciousness to stop it. But most of the times it was never stopped. Because if you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home. And then when you had kids, you beat them. Or whatever other crazy things went on in our households.
That covers a lot of things, because it could be why so many baby boomer mothers baby their sons so much. Maybe it's guilt over the abuse they saw them take. It's a reason why I think there's so much misogyny in that generation. I know my father was a huge misogynist, always something negative to say about women. And, you know, that generation was very, very misogynistic. And if you went to Catholic school, you could see why. Because if you're getting your ass kicked 6-1, and to be humiliated, she's like that. It's that humiliation, which was always my issue with my parents. It was always about public humiliation with my father. And I would explain why, because he would talk about these beatings, and so both of them would, of where they picked it up from. That public humiliation it just screws with your head. Which is why they need the flying monkeys, do you understand? Because they don't ever want that public humiliation again. That's the whole point of them going out and getting flying monkeys and telling lies about you and planting these seeds. Okay, so they never have to be publicly humiliated again. Which is why channels like this and us exposing them is the worst thing, because it's bringing them back to what set them off to begin with, that public humiliation. Which is why I said they will never allocute and admit publicly, even though that's the only thing that could possibly set them on the course of getting better and any type of forgiveness from us. They can never do it. They will never put themselves back in that position again, even though they know what they're doing exactly the same thing that was done to them, knowing it was wrong.
So this is a very poignant and telling point that this author makes. Okay, I'm going to read that last sentence again. It most certainly contributes heavily to subsequent incidences of self, spousal, and child abuse. Some studies indicate that before the age of 10, children are not quite able to assimilate their experiences mentally and emotionally. As an adult, when confronted with stimuli that resemble past trauma, uncontrollable, automatic responses occur that can be harmful to themselves or others. Sidebar. Here he's talking about complex post traumatic stress disorder. Just from going to fucking school. Okay, back to the author. What we mostly see and react to are those adults who lash out violently. They are the ones who get the press coverage. But far more insidious, dangerous, and invisible are those who retreat into a place either deep inside themselves or flee to a place outside of their bodies, just like they did as children during the times of their assault. This encompasses both victims and witnesses. Sidebar. I can remember times when someone else was being punished, how we sat at our desks. I know I sat at my desk just shaking, thinking my name might be called next, just hoping. And so you would take your eyes and look down, you know, to kind of as a kid, like, if I can't see you, you can't see me. And we would get hollered at to watch. We had to watch so that we knew what would happen. There were times that, and if you did that, maybe you didn't get the beating, but you'd have to kneel in the corner of the room with your nose to the corner for hours, on your knees, on the tiled floor, in the corner, in front of the room. Or sit on your hands all day till your hands were numb. These people were fucking creative. Okay, back to the article. In that state, they cease to participate in the present moment. So, little side note here, because I've taken little bits out of this entire article. So the author is talking about when you're being abused or witnessing the abuse. So in that state, they cease to participate in the present moment. Because of that, they become unable to make choices appropriate to their well-being. The societal implications of this are enormous. Let's go back to that sidebar. When you are in a state where you are disassociated from your present surroundings, your physical surroundings, that present moment, you become unable to make choices appropriate to your well-being. Oh, can't we all tell stories about that? We're talking about you go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. These people took children to their survival instincts, the basic survival instincts. We had to go so deep into our animal selves, and then our emotional self can't deal with that, and we disassociate. I cannot tell you how many interactions I had with abusive men where I completely disassociated while I was being choked, slapped, and punched. Need I say more? Back to the article. For those who rarely got physically abused, but got to see the rest of us going through it, it was a bit more crazy making. They never knew if or when. Another aspect largely neglected is the silence of nuns who were not violent. The majority of nuns knew what was going on at the hands of the more violent of their peers. Not once did I witness a non-abusive nun come to the defense of one of her charges. Sidebar. The ones who were not doing the abuse were probably abused themselves. We're talking about a sociopathic institution. Back to the article. As an example to developing young women, this perpetuates passivity and helplessness. How does a young man assimilate these experiences with powerful women into adulthood And his relationships, women are potential threats who must be controlled. End of that article. Just look at that last paragraph. Just look at these last little bits. Women becoming passive and helpless. Hello, we see this all the time. And men feeling that women are a threat. So they've taken the evil virus program and infected us. And then it all plays out in our lives to disastrous ends. Okay, now in that blog there are a number of posts. I mean, it goes on for pages and pages and pages and pages, and I read through quite a few. But I chose one that I thought was very telling. All right, and this post is by the son of an ex-nun. He said, and this was posted August 25th, 2014, and it's titled, Son of an Ex-Nun. My mother was a nun that had left the order out of New York City. She was a nun for 12 years before leaving at the age of 30 to have children. I have no idea what order she belonged to because I never asked her any questions about anything. She was a nun in the convent from 1955 to 1967. He says, I will not step foot in a Catholic church, and neither should anyone else unless they are a process server with a summons and a complaint in hand. The clergy is packed full of the sick, the damaged, and the most twisted among us, cloaked in sanctified garb.